yesteryear. Now, it's actually interesting. We are here towards the end of the Hebrew month of Shvat, and 26th of Shvat is going to mark the Hilula of famous Italian Rabbi Rabbi Mordechai Mortara, very famous rabbi of his time, or you could give his full title, Rabbi Mordechai Marco ben Yosef Halevi Mortara. Now, he was actually born on the 27th of Nisan, I believe, back in the year 1815. He would pass away, he'd be about 79 years of age, in the 2nd of February 1894, naturally the 26th of Shvat. He'd become a famous rabbi, he'd become let's say, a gatherer of great books in himself. He was a poet and a famous Jewish Italian, let's just say, at that point in time. I think he'd go on actually to become the head rabbi of Mantuba, which was a prominent position. Let's explore a few of the highlights of the famous rabbi's life. Now, as we said before, his name was also, you could say in English, was Marco in of itself. He was born, I think, in Nolad Dana, if I'm not mistaken. He was born in an area that was quite close to an area called Mantuba, and he came from auspices. His parents' name was Yosef and Simcha, if I'm not mistaken. They would actually move to Mantuba, I believe. It says over here, I'll say it in Hebrew, Abba leMantuba lishtalem b'limudei chol v'aya mitalmidav harishonim shel Shadal bebeit hamidrash rabbanim b'Padua. So it's actually very interesting. We have to point out over here. So I think he became one of the first students, if I'm not mistaken, of the famous Shadal. Who was Shadal? Rabbi Shlomo David Luzzatto, a very famous rabbi of his time, a rabbi that we've spoken about here on various occasions before. We have to point out here inside this series, so that's very interesting. Let's actually say a word with regard to Shadal for a minute, because it's I think it's appropriate to speak about him at this point in time. And we did record a video with regards to the history of the family, the Luzzatto family, and we did record a video, I think, at the Hilula time period of Rabbi of the Shadal himself, Rabbi Samuel David Luzzatto. He lived between 1800 to 1865, obviously known from acronym of an Italian, let's say, Austrian Jewish scholar, a poet, and a member of specific movements in himself. I think he actually passed away on the Day of Atonement, on Yom Kippur. He was already, his brilliant, let's just say, advancement came apparent when he was in Talmud Torah, where he was brilliant at Talmudic study. He was, I think, Talmud of Rabbi Abraham Eliezer Halevi, who was the chief rabbi at that point in time of Trieste, and who was let's say, a prominent pilpulist, let's just say, in itself. And he would actually study sciences when he was young, under Mordechai de Colognia, Leon Vita, Saravi, Raphael Baruch Segre, if I'm not mistaken. He would, I think, later on become his father-in-law. I think he would study Hebrew language at a high rate in of itself. And he had an extraordinary ability, let's just say, when he was reading books in school, and to write commentaries on them respectively. And very, very interesting. He had like a very, very broad amount of, let's just say, books in itself, even when he was at a very young age. And he had views on philosophy. For example, he was a warm defender, let's just say, of biblical and Talmudic Judaism, and his stronger position to philosophical Judaism, let's just say, brought him some opponents, let's just say, turn around own words, especially among contemporaries, if I'm not mistaken. He wrote many works, and I think his writings actually spanned around 50 years, or more than 50 years, which is very, very interesting. So he wrote many books, and it's a huge, vast amount. Many of it was written in Hebrew, some of them was written in Italian, and he was a rabbi that we did speak about beforehand in great amounts of detail, so we're not going to speak so much about him over here now. But he was, what's interesting is that the rabbi we're speaking about today, Rabbi Mordechai Mortara, was, I believe, one of the first students under him inside the Beit Midrash in Padua, respectively. I think it was in Yud Aleph Sivan, Heitav Kuf Tzadik Vav, Nismach l'Rabbanut To'ah Ma'alat Moreinu Harav. He would get a rabbinic ordination at that point in time. Prominent position, let's just say, very useful ordination. I think come with the year 1841, remember at that point in time he's about 26 years of age. I think Rabbi Yaakov Kazis would pass away, and he was a rabbi of Mantuba. And B'shna Ash'laracha B'chodesh Sivan Nivcha Mortara B'mkoma. He was actually appointed in his place. He would only be about 26, 27 years of age at that point in time, he had a very vast, let's just say, library in himself. Many various manuscripts. David Kaufman, if I'm not mistaken, very, very interesting. So there'll be a connection of this library with regards to David Kaufman, Rabbi David Kaufman. Who was he, just for a minute? I think we did speak about him before in another video. He was actually, I think, also a Jewish Austrian, I think, a rabbi that was prominent in, I think, in the Czech Republic. He was a purist, I think, or went to a purist school, if I'm not mistaken. He would eventually, I think, study Jewish Theological Seminary in Breslau, if I'm not mistaken. He would study in the University of Leipzig, and the Jewish Theological Seminary, I think he was offered, but he didn't get a role over there. I think he would also go, if I'm not mistaken, part of the Rabbinical Seminary of Budapest, and then later on he was librarian of the seminary and had a vast library, let's just say, of Padua. And if I'm not mistaken, he was part of the executive committee of the Budapest branch of the Alliance Israelite Universal and wrote various books, let's just say, and he was very much into Jewish art also, which is very, very interesting, just to point out also. Okay, so we're going back to Rabbi Mordechai Mortara over here. Who היה שמרן בדעתו הדתית וניהל ויכוח עם חכמי יהודה איטליה בנוגע לביטול יום טוב שני של גלויות. So let's respect what he actually said over there. והחזיק בדעה שאין לבטלו. So that was his opinion, just reading in Hebrew. כתלמידו המסור של שמואל דוד לוסאטו. He was a Talmud of the Shaddal. היה מורטרה מתנגד נחרץ לקבלה. דבר שהוביל למחלוקת חריפה עם הרב אליהו בן עמוזג. Remember, we spoke about Rav ben Amozeg on various occasions here inside this series over here. So he was a Talmud of Rabbi Shmuel Zata and was, I think, an opponent of Rabbi Amozeg, if I'm not mistaken, where there will be robust and sharp debates in of itself between two of them. That's what's reported over there, and I hope I translated that fine in Hebrew. So that's very, very, let's say, interesting also to point out. Who was Rabbi Eliyahu ben Amozag? Let's speak about him for a minute. He actually lived, I think, between the years 1823 to 1900. He was a Kabbalist, he was a philosopher, he was a Parsha Mikra, if I'm not mistaken, of his time. I think he lived about 77 years of age. And yeah, much has been said about him. We did record a video also with regards to him. Inside this series, he was one Italian Sephardic Orthodox rabbi. He was known as a Jewish Kabbalist, if I'm not mistaken. He would serve for half a century as a rabbi of the important Jewish community of Livorno, let's just say, where the Piazza Ben Amozeg new commentaries, his name and distinction would be about there, if I'm not mistaken. Very, very interesting, and he was very famous. I think they came from Moroccan family in itself. It was Moroccan heritage very much. So, on the topic of religious universalism, his works were noted for his, let's say, free and uninhabited use of various non-Jewish religious sources, if I'm not mistaken, that we have to point out with regards to him. And he wrote many various different works, including Amat Mafkia, the Ger Tzedek Nela David, Emla Mikra, Atam Leshad, and various other books also. That's something we have to point about him. This is about Rabbi Eliyahu ben Amozeh, someone that we've spoken about here on various occasions before. Okay, now we're going back to Rabbi Rabbi Mordechai. מלבד דרשות ומאמרים שפרסם בכתבי עת בגרמנית, עברית, צרפתית ואיטלקית. He was very, very multilingual. כתב ספר לימוד להוראה דתית. מסות ונושאים אקטואליים, מאמרים אפולוגטיים וחיבורים בביבליוגרפיה, עיונים במקרה מחשבות ישראל, תרגם לאיטלקית, ספרי תפילה. I think there'll be a translation. יותר מכל ספרו נודע מזכרת חכמי איטליה. So it's really known as a famous rabbi in Italy. Rabbi Mordechai Mortara was something very much we have to point out over there, friends. Anyone tuning in live, welcome to our community as we are exploring the head rabbi Mantuba of his time. So he would have memoirs, let's just say, of sages of Italian Jewish thought. translated books, and so on and so forth. Now it's actually interesting. He would have governmental ties also. Beno Ludovici, I think his name was. Haya Midnae Mishpatan. So he had, I think, let's say, someone that would work within regards to the country in itself. Very important. V'shimesh kachava Parliament Italiki. I think his son would actually be part of the Italian government, or you could say, in the parliament. Okay, and it says over here, Vishimesh kachave Parliament Italiki. V'yas Sara Mishpatim. It was a Sar Mishpatim there from Mishelet Italia. So this was his son in itself, I believe. Now he wrote two most famous books, including Maschelet Chochmei Italia. That was in 1886 in Padua. I believe that was actually released. That's something I very much have to point out over here. And then there was Ruach Yisrael, which is, I think, printed in Krakow in the year Taf Reish Nun Dalet. That's something that we have to very much point out in regards to him. So he was born in 1815 and passed away in 1894. And close to 80 years of age. Now, friends, we're going to take a short break just for a minute. We're going to come back in a minute's time and continue this presentation. So I think in the meantime, please everyone just watch your space. We're going to come back and share over another word in a minute's time. Sure. Hi, Shalom everyone, thanks for being patient over here as we're exploring the life within regards to a famous Italian Rabbi Mordechai Mortara, or popularly also known as Rabbi Marco Mortara, a famous rabbi that we've spoken about before inside the series, and I recommend anyone that If you're here for the first time, please check out all the other videos that we've recorded. We recorded a lot of content on famous rabbis yesterday, and we've got a whole library, and we're like an online encyclopedia, I like to say. And hopefully at one stage we will publish an encyclopedia also. That's definitely a great let's say ambition of ours over here inside this community over here. But we're speaking about Rabbi Marco over here. We'll use his name. Marco, I think, is a very popular Italian name, if I'm not mistaken, and how important actually it is to relay it over. Remember, he would live at the time period of Rabbi Samuel David Lozato, also known as a famous Shadal, we have to point out over here, who was a very, very famous rabbi, and a rabbi that we spoke about on great detail over here inside this series already. Okay, so we're going to say over just a few more insights within regards to him over here, friends. Okay, so it progresses. Let's just say this article, just using some of the notes from Wikipedia over here. I think obviously he graduated from the Rabbinical College of Padua in 1836, I think it was, and then he was called to become the rabbi of Mantua in 1842. A position he'd have until he passed away. He was seen as more conservative in his religious views, opposed the abolition of the second day of the holy days, which let's say had been planned by some of the more liberal members of the congregation. So it was definitely more, let's say, conservative. I think Eliezer Horowitz actually wrote it in his responsa 131 when in the year 1870 in Venice. And as we said, as a true disciple of the Shadal, Rabbi Shmuel David Lozato, he was a strong opponent of the Kabbalah, which involved him in, I think, a specific robust debate, as I said before, with regards to Rabbi Eliyahu ben Mose, if I'm not mistaken. So that's something that we have to point out. He would write various different sermons, articles, published in German, Hebrew, French, Italian, periodicals, textbooks for religious, let's say, instructions, essays on religious questions of a specific day, and apologetic essays, bibliographical works, let's say, and among, I think, which is of special importance, is a list of all the names pertaining to Jewish history in Italy, if I'm not mistaken, under a title called the Mascheret Hakmeh Italia, respectively, and there's a terminology used in Italy also. He is the father, if I'm not mistaken, of an Italian justice and senator. I think Rav Marco is. His name was. This is father of here, Ludovico Mortara, if I'm not mistaken. So that's something very interesting to point out. Who was he? He was an Italian jurist, magistrate, and a politician, and would serve as a minister of justice with the first Nitti government. And also he was a grandfather of a statistician, someone named Giorgio Mortara. He was also a demographer, an economist, a statistician, and the son of Lodovico Mortara, and who obviously was a magistrate and a politician also. So much as he's actually featured, I think, on the Jewish Encyclopedia website. There's a lot of information about him online over here, but let's explore a bit more within regards to him over here, friends. And we're a community here that loves learning about great rabbis or famous rabbis this year. So let's say something about Rabbi Mordechai over here. Now we're going to use the website of the Kol Yisrael Chaverim over here. Just talking once again, saying that he would study at the rabbinical seminary that was founded by the Shadal, and obviously was one of the first and closest students in of itself, and how it was, let's say, ordained at such a young age, the brilliance within regards to it. And he, I think it was in 1866, he was part of a conference of rabbis in Italy discussing, let's say, the problems that to deal with in Judaism and possibilities of changes in halacha that might have to combat. I think among the things he would propose to abolish the second day of the Jewish holiday, if I'm not mistaken. So, no, I think that was the main debate over there. I'm not too sure the whole insights and outs over there, but I think he would oppose it's being abolished, if I'm not mistaken. He was a very well-educated scholar and a great Talmudic scholar in itself, explaining concepts of Judaism in accordance with concepts, and was we'll look at the situation, so to say, in of itself. As we said before, his son was Ludovico Mortara, who he left behind. And I think Rabbi Mordechai Mortara would author various different books, if I'm not mistaken. Most famous book, The Spirit of Israel. I think he wrote in his final years, and the book was printed, I think, in Italian, if I'm not mistaken. So that's very, very interesting. And more can be said within regards to him. Of your friends, anyone tuning in live Welcome to our community as we're exploring a little bit with regards to the chief rabbi of Italy. And it says, והחלק הראשון עסק בקדמות המקרא והאחדות בקדמות האמונה ישראלית בכל אחד. והחלק השני עסק במושני יסוד ביהדות ובתנ"ך. בין כתביו הנוספים יש לציין את מאמרו חשוב על אמיתת ספרי תנ"ך, תורה, נביאים הכתובים, שתורגם לעבירה, נתפס בידי החכם משה יצחק אשכנזי, so I think it was printed through him, בספרו העיל משה, this was in 1881 in Livorno, הוא חיבר גם את סדר תפילות, כפי מנהג קהל קודש איטליאני, so he would do books with regards to Italian, as I say, traditions. And שנתפס בשנת, I think in the year 1866, he would print in Mantua, ואת ספר מזכרת חכמי איטליה. I think it would write down 2,000 rabbis of Italy, if I'm not mistaken, שנתפס בשנת תפריש מ"ז in 1866 in Padua, respectively. And he passed away on a Shabbat evening, if I'm not mistaken, or Parshat Mishpatim, I believe. And it was the 26th of Shvat. I believe it was in English in 1894, so we're talking about more than 130 years ago. The famous rabbi passed away. There's more information about him also we have to stress out over here. So yeah, he was a famous rabbi and someone I think that we have to speak more about at a later stage in time. Rabbi Mordechai Mortara Halevi. So he had the title Halevi also on his family name, the 26th of Shvat. Let's explore a few of the highlights from his book over here. Just now we're reading from the Hayomi website over here. One of the books from the Ruach Israel from pages 155 to 156. What does it say over here? It says just basically the importance. He was a historian, he was a Hacham, he was someone very, very wise. He would, let's say, toil around and so on and so forth in regards to his ideas and the great library he had in of itself. Let's explore a few of the highlights of his book. Melamed, שכל הגויים יתערבו אלה באלה והיו לקהילה אחים. So this is a teaching he gives over, I think, page 155 to 156 of the Ruach Israel. Now, another teaching he will give. מלמד, לב האדם מודיע לו, שמחה שאדם שמח. בסותו הטוב. This is one of his teachings, I believe, once again featured in the Ruach Israel, I believe on page 97. We're going to explore a few more teachings of here, so just watch your space for a minute, as we'll be back in 1 minute, friends, over here. So watch your space. Okay, Shalom everyone, thanks for being patient over here. We're exploring a few of the highlights from his book. Another, let's say, topic he will talk about inside his book, שעונש המובל בעל שהתירו לעצמם חטיפת העלמות. This actually comes from page number 27 of the Ruach Yisrael, another teaching, final teaching. We're just going to say it over he gave. מלמד שלכל אדם ניתנו הכוחות הצדיקים למצבו שהוצב בעולם. This is from the Ruach Yisrael, I think very much featured in pages 69 to 67 about the famous rabbi of his time. So that's very, very interesting. And there is information also given on the Wikipedia, the encyclopedia, I think a Judaica one, if I'm not mistaken, or regular encyclopedia, talking about how he would officiate as a rabbi of Mantua in his time. He represented, very interesting. I think at that point in time, there was a more liberal trend in Judaism in Italy. let's just say, himself, so he had to combat that. And he proposed, I believe, a conference of Italian rabbis in 1866 in order to secure certain reforms in Jewish practices, apparently. But I think his suggestion did not materialize, or whatever it was. And he opposed the documentary hypothesis and argued for the unity and Mosaic authorships of the Torah. I think this was in 1843. And he considered that the task of Judaism was to spread monotheism and mortality throughout the world, and that this was facilitated by, let's say, the dispersion. Rabbi Mortara would publish books on the principles of Judaism, reported over, and a new edition of the prayer book, let's say, the translation into Italian, was based on that by the famous Rabbi Samuel David Lazata, the Shadal, who we mentioned about before. His most important work, reported over here, was in the area of bibliography and includes a catalogue of the manuscripts in the library of the Mantua community, reported over. And the Mascheret Achmi Italia, if I'm not mistaken, who was there at that point in time, was over there also, if I'm not mistaken. There was a list of approximately 2,000 Jewish scholars living in Italy from the 1st to the 19th centuries. Very, very astounding over there, and astounding. He was a notable bibliophile, and his collection of manuscripts were purchased after his death by, I think, Rabbi David Kaufman, who we spoke about also before. So that's something very interesting to point out. Over here, and he was definitely a famous rabbi of his time, so that's something that we very much have to point out over here. So we haven't spoken actually about an Italian rabbi for quite a while, so it makes a breath of fresh air, let's just say, to speak about the famous rabbi over here. So very, very interesting. So friends, everyone, we're a community here, as you know. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We've got so much fantastic content coming up, for not just for you fantastic people, for Am Yisrael also. So very exciting. And I think take care, and wishing all Shabbat Shalom, because we're about to go inside Shabbat, Parshat Mishpatim, this Shabbat coming. So very, very interesting. So please, everyone, be well. Take care.